Good afternoon. It's Friday the 15th of September 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and joining me by video link today, we've got Vanessa Beeley and Kevork Almassian. So we're going to get kicked off with the first meeting of the UK's Biosecurity Leadership Council, and I'm sure everybody's wondering what that is. It's brand new. It's all about the UK's global leadership in the safe and responsible use of engineering biology, and this is going to be driven by this first ever meeting of the UK Biosecurity Leadership Council, bringing together, according to the UK government, some of the UK's brightest minds from the worlds of science, research and business. So there you go. Engineering biology, they say, is one of the most exciting new frontiers in science. It describes the application of rigorous engineering principles to biology, enabling the construction of a new or redesigned biological systems such as cells and proteins. It has the potential to change the way we grow food, create medical treatments, and produce sustainable fuel that we need to run our cars, homes, and offices. So it is the gift that keeps on giving. So imagine who might be involved with this. Well, of course, usual suspects: King's College London, University of Cambridge, GSK, AstraZeneca, Oxford Nanopore, the likes of the UK Bioindustry Association and the Centre for Long-Term Resilience. But I thought the most amusing aspect of this was the fact that Google DeepMind is going to be involved with this as well. Now, there's going to be a lot of money for it. So here is a UK Research and Innovation grant of £102 million for synthetic biology for growth. So because the UK is a leader in engineering, it's going to be spending all this money invested through the UK Research and Innovation Synthetic Biology for Growth program. Here's another program, Engineering Biology Mission Hubs and Mission Awards, another £73.6 million for the same type of thing. So how do you feel about that, Vanessa? Biologically engineered food, are you keen to taste that?
In a word, no.
Okay.
I mean, we're just heading into this kind of weird alternative reality where everything that we eat, consume, breathe, use is going to be engineered. I don't know. It's horrifying, actually.
Well, they say that this is going to help shape the way advances in engineering biology are governed, to guard against potential risks while ensuring the UK's world-leading biology, health and life sciences innovators are supported to explore, invent and continue to thrive. So that must make everybody feel fantastic. Okay, let's move on to Libya and the flooding over there. Now, this particular video, let's have a look. Here's David Miliband. Of course, former leader of the Labour Party and currently head of the International Rescue Committee. The devastation from Storm Daniel in Libya has been enormous. At least 5,000 killed. This, of course, was published yesterday, and 30,000 displaced. Years of conflict, we're going to come on to that in a second, have eroded the country's ability to respond to increasing climate disasters. So this is very much the narrative that it's all climate change. And Vanessa sent me through this particular clip earlier on, this drone clip showing the devastation afterwards. Now, of course, there are calls for investigation and so on, but the question is, why has this actually happened? Well, it's hardly surprising that it's happened because a year ago, this gentleman, Dr. Ashur, had put out a scientific paper in which he said this: the dams are in poor condition. A major flood would be likely to cause one of the two dams to collapse. If a huge flood happens, the result will be catastrophic for the people of the Wadi and the city. So again, the question has been asked. The question to be asked is what has been the cause of this? And if we bring Miliband's tweet back on, years of conflict, he says. But of course, what caused the years of conflict? And Vanessa, we've got to say, this basically comes down to the UK, France, and all the other countries that were involved in the bombing of Libya, where they targeted the water infrastructure of the country in 2011.
Yeah, I mean, this is the result of the war crime of the NATO aggression against Libya, and very much in the same way, of course, NATO member states targeted, as in 2017, they targeted the Tabqa Dam on the Euphrates with a 2,000-pound bomb and threatened the lives of 10,000 civilians living in the area. And it was only because of a hurriedly arranged ceasefire and Syrian engineers going onto the dam to repair it. So, I mean, it's really nothing new. This is all down to the NATO destruction or NATO member state destruction of essential infrastructure in the countries they target.
Yes, and Kevork, maybe I could welcome you to the program at this point and see what your thoughts are, because I mean, what we've got to keep in mind is that Libya, up until the bombing in 2011, was basically had probably the best infrastructure, certainly the best water infrastructure in the whole of North Africa, and what we did effectively by bombing the country as we did at the time was to bomb it back into the Stone Age. So there was no question that even with the best will in the world, Libya as a country was going to be able to maintain the infrastructure to a level that would be necessary.
Actually, I was reading an article today on the Irish Times, and they also say that human errors exaggerated or contributed in the deaths of lots of people in Libya because there was no competent reaction before and after this disaster that happened in Libya. But it's so disingenuous to see that a lot of mainstream outlets aren't even mentioning the real cause of the chaos in Libya. They say there are human errors, and they say that Libya is now in internal infighting and the infrastructure is destroyed. But the root cause of this misery in Libya is because of NATO's intervention in 2011. And the other day, a few days ago, I was sitting with the spokesperson for Gaddafi here in Berlin, and the stories that he told me go in parallel with a lot of stories that we heard and we documented in Syria. It was a very dirty war against Libya, against the Libyan people, for them being an advanced, developed country, progressive in one way or another in the northern African continent. And Africa was an example to show the Africans that the people in the continent do not need the so-called humanitarian aid, the so-called assistance that many Western governments brag about on social media platforms day and night. Libya can be self-sufficient, can govern themselves, but when you destroy a centralized government, and you fragment the country on three different lines, and you install 2-3 different governments and parliaments in one country. Of course, this would be the one of the results of what could have happened. For example, when Vanessa mentioned Al Tabqa Air Base, the United States refused to acknowledge that they bombed Al Tabqa, water dam, and but even the New York Times acknowledged that they were the members of top secret U.S. Special Operations Unit called Task Force 9. Those are the ones who detonated Syria's Tabqa Dam, and they were very close to causing a huge humanitarian disaster. Again, they could have ended up by murdering tens of thousands of people in Syria, but they fortunately this plan was failed. But in Libya nowadays, I would say the media is very, very dishonest with the people by simply not even mentioning that the current situation in Libya and why the state institutions are paralyzed, why there is all this chaos and infighting and the infrastructure is destroyed. The moment they point their finger to the source of the wound, everybody will understand that NATO was not a force of peace in Libya and North Africa.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And let's just bring one example of that, because we've got this tweet that Vanessa sent over to me earlier. And Vanessa, Nina is saying here, it's so enjoyable. The BBC got slapped with a community note about Libya. This is on Twitter or X, of course. As you can see, their coverage mentions Libya's former prosperity and the current devastation, but conveniently leaves out the cause of the status change, the utter destruction of the 2011 intervention by everyone's favorite, ever so defensive alliance. NATO. And so I thought that was quite appropriate that Twitter had put that notice on, and a bit of revenge, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the BBC deserves it. And as Kevork pointed out, the majority of the media is conveniently leaving out the NATO member state damage.
Yes. Okay, so let's move over to Greece then, Vanessa. And well, this actually, looking for Greece floods on the search engine of choice this morning, very, very little coverage in the UK press. Some in the EU, but not in the UK.
No, it's quite extraordinary. Since these floods started, which was about a week ago, there has been very little, very scant reporting on it. And what I've basically relied on almost entirely is news that I'm receiving from Greek activists and Greek community media outlets and some Greek mainstream media outlets. So some of the translations are a little strange because they're directly translated by Google. I've changed some of them. So first of all, Thessaly, the fear of the food crisis. Now, this is a very important factor in these floods. It is being described as a disaster of biblical proportions affecting fields, animals, equipment, machinery, supplies, irrigation projects, agricultural road networks, product warehouses, livestock units, trees, and crops. So let's just have a look, I think, where Thessaly is in relation to the rest of Greece. We pointed it out last week, but it's effectively to the north of Athens, although Athens actually was also affected by the floods. And the two main areas that I'm going to talk about are Karditsa and Larissa, which is just to the kind of the northeast of Karditsa. So moving on.
We've got a little bit of video.
Yes. So this is video with sound of the start of the floods. And I've left the sound because it is really quite horrifying to imagine being there. It's only about 18 seconds. So just roll the video. And then the next video that we're going to see is aerial video that was taken a couple of days ago. And I think what's interesting, I'll kind of talk over this, but this shows the extent of the flooding. Hundreds of thousands of hectares of farmland destroyed effectively, and machinery, animals, livestock. It is reported by many activists that I'm speaking to that the Greek government is refusing aid from the EU. And the activists on the ground are saying that's because they don't want people to be here from outside Greece to see the devastation and also to discover the bodies that are clearly under this flood. It's being described as the biggest disaster since 1940. There will be no harvest this year. Corn, fruits, cotton, vegetable, and fodder is destroyed. Stored grains have been lost, so that means no crop in 2024. Animal stocks are severely depleted and will be very difficult to replace. Thousands of livestock animals have been killed, and their bodies are still being... So dead bodies are in this water also, whether it's animals, human, rats, excreta. So this water itself is severely polluted. These are just a couple of photos from some of the rescue efforts, just going through them quite quickly. And this again on the right shows the extent of the flooding. And if we just move on quite quickly through this. So what I also want to mention is the way that the Greek government is dealing with the victims of this flood in a very inhumane way, in a very abusive way. So flood victims, the majority, of course, are agricultural workers and farmers, have been asked to pay to receive compensation. So farmers and stock breeders who've already paid their staggering premiums to their insurance companies have been devastated, and we'll just see livestock farmers with 200 dead sheep were asked to pay in advance 400 euros. Farmers with 100 acres of cultivation were asked to pay in advance, again, 220 euros. other farmers pay €2 per acre to apply for compensation. So this is even before they receive any compensation. And here again, the government legitimizes black-heartedness. As I said, this is translation from the Greek, in water for the affected. So basically what they've done, instead of giving free bottled clean water to the victims of this flood, they are setting a ceiling of €2.50 per six-pack. So in other words, they're not providing free aid to the victims. Bad weather, they don't recruit, they don't use hotels to house those that have been displaced by the floods. What they do is to basically kick out refugees from refugee centers in the area. If we move on to the text of the article, the refugee structures are being recruited by the government to house the flood victims of the Thessalian plain. The plan calls for the evacuation of the camp in Kutsorhero by about 900 refugees living in the structure in order to bring in those that have been displaced. Instead of providing hotels and temporary housing, they're basically kicking out refugees and replacing it with indigenous refugees. Quite appalling from the Greek government. And then moving on. Also, it's become apparent that there was a 2017 study, and even studies from before that, from 2007 onwards, that warned that the Thessaly Water Division is Greece's most vulnerable, as flood zones cover 31.2% of the area. And the study basically was not acted upon. It wasn't updated as it should be according to European regulations. The European Commission has therefore appealed against Greece since February 2022 for violation of European legislation. So the authorities, again, just as they did with the forest fires, had neglected the areas that were hit by the fires, also neglected the areas that have been hit by the floods. So Terra in Larissa, if you remember, Larissa is to the northeast of Karditsa, almost 12 meters from Pinos Komeni, and divides the country in two, including the military base where there are images of the helicopters underwater. And then moving on. And there is new revelations about breaking the dams, effectively the water barriers, concern only for Karditsa and how the waters were diverted to effectively devastate the plains around Karditsa. So we'll see why shortly. This is the blog that I've relied on before for information. So from organized arson to organized floods, the Greek lockdown junta becomes the EU's poster boy for climate change. Now, interesting here, Mike, because we haven't actually seen legacy media jump on board with the climate change headlines, and we might know why very shortly. But if we move on again, so basically, there are plaintiffs claiming that various dams, I think now it's up to 4 dams, were deliberately either dynamited or opened to divert the water away from Karditsa into the plains, into the floodplains, which are mostly agricultural and livestock areas. And as he says, if that is the case, then the agricultural area was removed from production for a reason, to ensure a shortage of food and to fulfill EU climate change, i.e. net zero quotas. And there was no intervention by the state apparatus in any dam in the area which caused water redirection, said the head of the climate sector in the Greek government. He claimed that that was fake news and conspiracy theory. So let's see if it was. Moving on again. So I'm just going to show you again where Karditsa is on the map. Moving on quickly to the next image, which shows very clearly Karditsa at the bottom there, that the waters were very clearly diverted away from Karditsa towards the floodplains there. Larissa was also heavily affected. And now if we move on, we can see why. Thessalia area, which got flooded, provides 38% of Greek cotton, 52% of tomatoes, 20% of cow's milk, 13.7% of goat's milk, 40% of soft cheese, 25% hard cheese, 18.5% of beef, and 41% exports of milk-based products. So it's a very, very important area both to Greece and to Greek trade. So let's come on to why the government might have taken the decision to divert the waters from Karditsa. The big US plans for Thessaly, just as we talked about at Alexandroupolis a couple of weeks ago, referenced the fire and the NATO expansion of its military base in Alexandroupolis. The US decision to invest more in the air base of Larissa and to upgrade it with the aim of creating the permanent basis of the administration of the American Air Force Europe, Africa, while it has provoked the reaction of the Larissa Peace Committee in a statement. So that was in 2022. They have invested many millions of dollars in support, turning Thessaly into an American native base. Then let's see, so in November 2021, Erdogan, president of Turkey, said that US military bases in Greece are so many that they cannot be measured. Greece has become practically an outpost of America. Of course, Erdogan has, let's say, alternative agendas behind his words, but nevertheless, it appears to be true. And then this is when it gets quite interesting. So a foreign company is committed to 10,000 acres in Karditsa for photovoltaics, for solar panels. Let's see who this company is. Israelis in Thessaly with 5 large photovoltaics. If completed, the projects will be able to allegedly produce clean and cheap energy for more than 350,000 households. Moving on. Astrom is a construction company based in Israel that is now expanding into Europe using Greece as its pilot scheme for solar energy in Europe to provide solar energy to Greece and to Europe. So Astrom Renewable Energy co-developed solar projects in Greece. Moving on again. The producers who spoke to us claimed that the company representatives had stated that their goal was to commit 10,000 acres to the construction of solar energy, and that will begin in 2024. What is interesting is that farmers that applied for solar energy were turned down because they didn't have the money to invest in this. So Israel taking priority over local farmers. Moving on. This is an important lesson that came out of this, and this came from a Greek friend of mine who's commenting on Facebook. During the floods, authorities also visited the scene of the Tempe rail crash, which was 6 months ago in the same area, in the Thessaly area. And during the visit, they found exposed human limbs that hadn't been cleaned from or identified from the scene of the crash. And as my friend pointed out, she said at Tempe, passengers helped passengers. During the fires, citizens helped citizens. And during the floods, villagers helped villagers. We don't need the state. What certainly seems to be going on in Greece is that Greece is being destroyed and prepared to be the energy hub for Greece and for Europe, to avoid or to freeze Russia out of the energy market for the EU. Quite horrific stories now coming out also.
Okay, thank you for that, Vanessa. I think we'd like to talk a little bit more about this in extra, because this whole notion of reappropriation of land is something that lots of people seem to be talking about, and there certainly seems to be something to discuss there. I mean, do you think that is a realistic, a serious proposition, that's what's going on?
Well, judging by the reaction of the Greek activists and legal teams that are now dealing with it, and I saw today very quickly that there is a case for murder if the government did deliberately divert the waters away from Karditsa into the floodplains. And also the fact that the government, again, as I said, it neglected the forestry areas, which then easily caught fire recently. But they also neglected sort of help and preparation for the floodplains to prevent a disaster of this magnitude. And so you have to ask why. They received the funds from the EU to carry out the various works that they needed to prepare for this kind of disaster, and yet they didn't. So I guess you have to very clearly ask questions. Whether the evidence is there, I guess the court case will bring more to light.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Okay, now if you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. You can join us there, become a member of the community. That'd be very much appreciated. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please do share anything you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Now, I want to remind everybody of this event, On Guard for the Liberty of Mankind, taking place in Sweden. This is on Saturday, the 30th of September, 2023. This is one day of a 3-day event, and anybody that's in the area or would like to go there, it is possible to get tickets to join that event live, but otherwise it will be live streamed from Sweden by Oracle Films, and you can see the various many of the names that will be taking part in that on screen at the moment. If you'd like more details, go to doctorsappeal.com and you can find more information about that there. Okay, let's move on then. And we're going to talk about Armenia for a second now. Vanessa mentioned this last week. Before we get started, I just thought we should bring the map on screen and give everybody an idea of the area that we're talking about here. So obviously the red area is Russia. But if we zoom in on Armenia in blue there and Azerbaijan to the right-hand side of it in green, this is the area that we're talking about. Over the last week, we're seeing headlines like this appearing in the mainstream press: Is Armenia turning to the West? So this is from Wednesday in Radio Free Europe. We all know what Radio Free Europe is, but they're saying that for centuries, Armenians have had a tight relationship with Russia, but those ties have come under strain over the past year and a half as Russia, bogged down in Ukraine, has largely stood aside as its Armenian ally faces ever-increasing pressure from Azerbaijan. And this narrative is even appearing in the Russian press. So this is a TASS article, Pashinyan, changing countries' politics to align with the West, according to experts. I want to welcome, Stephanie, I want to welcome Kevork back on screen and just get a view from you about these headlines that are appearing, Kevork, and let's see where that takes us in terms of conversation.
Actually, while the world can see the shift in the balance of power in favor of Russia and China, an increasing number of countries are joining the BRICS economic bloc and other, I would say, security architectures in Eurasia, such as the CSTO, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Unfortunately, in 2018, just like in Georgia and in Ukraine, there was a USAID, NED, Soros-backed color revolution in Armenia, which brought a journalist who used to write in yellow newspapers. We call it yellow newspapers because they highly rely on controversial clickbait information just to create hype in the society. So Pashinyan wasn't even a real journalist, in my opinion. He comes to power after huge, I would say, media support through the NGOs in Armenia that are funded by USAID, NED, and George Soros. And the moment he came to power, I warned the Armenians that Armenia will start shifting toward the West, and it was called a conspiracy theory. And today we can see the result of this color revolution, and that is Pashinyan is now doing a very clear and publicly declared U-turn toward the West, and he invited American forces to Armenia for joint training with the Armenian forces, although all the hardware technology of the Armenian forces are from Russia. All types of Armenia doesn't have any sort of weaponry from the United States. It's all from either from the Soviet era or from Russia. I'm not saying that Armenia should be a client state for Russia or for the United States, but what I can clearly see that this is a self-harming policy. Armenia is shooting to its own leg by this U-turn, because, in my opinion, the interest of Armenia is to have a strategic friendship with Russia, at the same time to have a good trade relationship with the West. But if Armenia wants to shift its foreign policy and align itself and embed with the NATO side, the result for it will be that Armenia will lose more territories to Azerbaijan, which has a superior army, which is a very rich country, and most of the countries, including Russia and the West, are in a honeymoon with Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan played very smart in the past decade one and two, and it diversified the relationship between the East and West, and now everybody is wanting to pursue good relationship with Azerbaijan, while Armenia is antagonizing Russia in the Southern Caucasus, which is a sphere of influence for Russia. And let's remember that both Azerbaijan and Armenia, they were formerly Soviet countries. So I think the smart thing to do here for Armenia is to diversify its relationship instead of becoming a pawn for NATO, which the experience in Ukraine proved that NATO is ready to use Armenia just like they used the Ukrainians to the last standing person there in order to fight against the Russian Federation. And this is quite clear to me because the goal of Pashinyan government is to kick the Russian forces out of Armenia because they have a military base there, and also the peacekeeping forces who are standing between Azerbaijan and the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, where Azerbaijan wants to ethnically cleanse the 120,000 Armenians in Karabakh who are trapped now in this independent region. And Azerbaijan basically blocked the only life route for the Nagorno-Karabakh, which is called Lachin Corridor. And by doing so, the people there, 120,000 people, are starving, and nobody is able to lift this blockade on the Armenians there. But I would say if the Armenian government isn't trying to help the Armenians of Karabakh and isn't pursuing the foreign policy that can serve the interests of the Armenians there, in my opinion, the only side that Armenians should point fingers and blame now is the Pashinyan government.
And so, I mean, it would be a bit of a grim look into the future, but is it your opinion that if things continue the way they're going, we could see a Ukraine-like situation happening there?
I think the Russians have excessive power in Southern Caucasus. I think the Russians do not need Armenia as an ally country now because they have a very strong partner now in Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan is able to present and the national security to give national security guarantees for Russia and also the interests of Russia in the region. Armenia is sandwiched between Azerbaijan and Turkey. And at the same time, Armenia is pursuing an let's say, hostile policy toward Russia. So what could go wrong, right? In my opinion, if the Russians withdraw their hands from the Armenian file, we will see that Armenians will be swallowed by Turkey and Azerbaijan. They are the weaker side in this equation, and no side, not even NATO, not even Russia, are willing to intervene because you have to help yourself before others come and help you. And the current policy in Yerevan is shooting themselves in the leg. And therefore, there could be the scenario of Ukraine, but I don't think the Russians are even interested in intervening militarily to secure their interest there, because one, they have already secured their interest through Azerbaijan, and two, Iran is the only party there who is willing and declaring that they want to intervene militarily if Azerbaijan tries to change the borders between Armenia and Iran, because the Azerbaijani demand is to open a new trade route on the borders between the borders of Armenia and Iran, and by doing so, they will seal the borders between Armenia and Iran. So it's in Iran's interest to intervene there and not in Russia's.
Oh, okay, and thinking back to the map, then between Armenia and Russia, of course, is Georgia. We had the incident in 2008 in northern Georgia. I mean, where does Georgia sit in this whole situation?
Georgia is mostly aligned with the Western Bloc in this, and they don't have good relationship with Armenia for a very long time. But now the current situation in Georgia is similar to the situation in Armenia, and all in all, this Eastern European Bloc, especially in Georgia and Armenia, the current Armenian leadership, they are increasingly and let's say rapidly but surely aligning themselves with the Western interest, and this is harming their own, in my opinion, their interest, because this country's positions, geographically speaking, is either in the Southern Caucasus or in Eastern Europe, and this is the background or the playground of Russia there, and if both Armenia and Georgia want to continue in their current path, I think we will see more destabilization in the region, because the security, they will need a new security architecture there. They will need a new reformation of their armies, their security apparatuses, if they want to move toward the West. This is not something that could be done in a day or two. These countries and the people in these countries must understand that the geography plays a role, politics plays a role, and also the social, let's say, the societies in these countries play a role. And if you see these two countries, Georgia and Armenia, naturally speaking, these countries should revolve in the orbit of Russia and at the same time have good relationship with the West. So if any of these countries become a pawn to any of the superpowers, then there will be a destabilization and there will be an attempt to use these countries against the other superpower. And Armenia for a very long time played smart, and they were strategically aligned with Russia. And until 2018, only in 2018, when Pashinyan came to power, he uh, eliminated all the pro-Russian officers, generals from the army, from the security apparatuses, and exposed its national security to Azerbaijan. So when Azerbaijan attacked Armenia or Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, and recently also on Armenia, the Russian side didn't come for help, because the Russian side knows that Pashinyan is trying to trap Russia also into conflict in the Southern Caucasus in order to make Russia busy on two military fronts and not only in Ukraine, which is the American demand from Pashinyan to drag Russia into another bloody conflict, but this time in the Southern Caucasus.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Kevork. We will talk more about that later as well. But in the meantime, then, Vanessa, let's come to the other front with Russia, perhaps that's Syria.
Yeah, just a very quick report today to point out, we talked about the 3 Republican congressmen that entered Syria illegally, of course, through a crossing that is manned by terrorist groups that are actually under sanctions by the Biden administration. And so very recently, we also talked about the unrest in the Northeast, the US-occupied zone, where, of course, on an almost daily basis, the US is stealing Syria's oil. US officials visit Syria's Deir al-Zur in bid to defuse the Arab tribal unrest. The Arab tribes have effectively risen up against the Kurdish separatist occupation of the northeast. So very familiar to see a US delegation appear in the northeast to try and settle the situation down. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Syria, Ethan Goldrich, and Major General Joel B. Val heads the alleged coalition against Islamic State. Of course, as I constantly explain, ISIS is nothing more than another proxy of the United States inside Syria and Iraq. They met with Arab tribal leaders and the Kurdish Contra commanders and agreed to address local grievances and de-escalate violence as soon as possible and avoid casualties, the State Department said. Of course, it's not their place to enter northeast Syria, as Syrian officials also condemned US delegations' illegal visit to northeastern Syria, because, of course, it violates the country's sovereignty and state integrity. But the US has consistently done that since 2011. Syria, according to a statement put out by Foreign Minister Faisal Muqdad, support the Arab tribesmen in their battle against the Kurdish Contras because, of course, they perceive this as an opportunity to uproot the Kurdish Contras from the northeast. During this period, the US occupation forces looted and smuggled more Syrian resources to their bases in Iraqi territory, taking out a load of about 95 tankers of oil from the Al Jazeera fields during the past 24 hours. So the theft continues. Moving on. And the clashes renew between the US-backed proxy, so-called rebel tribes, the Kurdish Contras in northeast Syria, and the Arab tribes themselves, as we mentioned. But then I want to quickly look at the map of Syria, and I'm sure Kevork will comment on this. Going from west and then going around it as a clock, we had 2 Israeli attacks in the last 2 days, during the afternoon, actually, which is fairly unusual, followed by another one. So first of all was to southern Tartus, to a military base there, which killed 2 Syrian Arab army soldiers and injured others. The missiles were fired from international waters to the west in the Mediterranean, off the coast of Syria. And then from northern Lebanon, they targeted southern Hama, the second area that you can see. Now, of course, these 2 attacks have 2 reasons. One is to create a gap in the Syrian air defense capability to enable Israel, as it perceives, to target what they consider to be the strategic development centers inside Syria, developing both defensive and offensive weapon capability. But at the same time, if you look at the area in Idlib, which is occupied by Al-Qaeda and its various affiliates, you'll see that there has been an increase in military activity to the west of Aleppo, to the south of Idlib and the north of Hama, and to the north of Latakia. So the Israeli attacks never are coincidental. They often come in tandem with either advance by the Syrian Arab Army against terrorist positions or attacks by the terrorists against Syrian Arab Army positions. Then if you go around the map, as I've mentioned before, Syria at the moment, what the US cartel is trying to achieve, of course, is a shrinking Syrian central state. So the northern areas are controlled by US proxies, the Kurdish Contras, and Turkish proxies, which are basically derivatives of the Free Syrian Army, the Muslim Brotherhood extremists. Coming around the map again, you'll see Deir ez-Zor. Interesting that the Kurdish Contras currently seem to be withdrawing from this area, from the Deir ez-Zor area. And then coming down to Al-Bukamal, which I pointed out quite frequently, is the area that the US wants to gain control of, because this is the opening for Iraq, or the border crossing for Iraq and Iran, to send humanitarian relief into Syria. So I've drawn the yellow line to show where the US wants to gain control, to basically close off much of that eastern border area, because of course it has control at Al-Tanaf, its military base, and at Rukban, alleged refugee camp, which is another recruitment center for ISIS and various extremist groups. Then coming to the south, as I've drawn there, the red line showing the areas that are obviously under attack by the forces of proxy forces of Israel and the US alliance, as we've talked about in Sweda and Dara. There have been 2 assassinations of fairly high-level officials in Dara in the last 10 days. And in Sweda, the protests, which are basically sponsored by Israel and the US, and power multiplied by Israel and the US and Western media, are continuing. There have been attempts to take over official centers and institutions there in the last few days. So that, I think, just gives you a very quick update of what is going on here.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Now let's come back to the UK then, and you, Les. Well, of course, Sunday is the day that if you're in Wales, anything that was a 30 mile per hour zone is going to become a 20 mile per hour zone. So how has this been presented in the BBC? Just to take one example, because this is right across the mainstream press, of course. 20 miles per hour, Wales speed limit, sat-nav warning ahead of change. So you can't rely on your sat-nav to tell you where the 20 mile an hour zones are. But of course, the reason that this is being done, according to the BBC, is because of stopping distances and because there's so many people dying on the roads. We've got to reduce the speed limit in order to reduce casualties on the roads. Now, other media around the world, and if we look to the EU and France in particular, are being a bit more honest about the situation. Here's Euronews saying Paris puts its speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour, which is roughly 20 miles per hour, in a bid to protect the climate. And that, of course, is what is really going on here. This is about protecting the climate, shall we say, and it leads into ultra low emission zones. Of course, this issue of ultra low emission zones around the country are becoming a major issue for local councils as the debate over that continues to rumble on. Now, in London, of course, where most of the activity is, there have been a couple of court cases. Well, this crowdfunder had been raising money for a court case to stop the ULEZ expansion in in London. £23,654 had been raised. That was an expanded stretch target. So they did well and they got the money they needed to take the case. And that was in the High Court yesterday. Now, unfortunately, it did not win. And this was the judge, Mrs. Justice Cockrell. Let's just bring her a bit bigger on screen. She decided that really there was no prospect of her actually being able to impose a reversal of the policy in London, so she threw the case out. She said that, the case, I'll just mention, the case was brought by Chris White and Ed Gregory, who were responsible for that crowdfunder. And they were arguing in court that that Sadiq Khan lacked the legal powers to impose charges on drivers. So their claim said the decision of the mayor to expand ULEZ was unlawful in that the mayor's stated objective in making the decision to impose road charging to clean up London's toxic air and tackle the climate emergency is not an objective mandated by the Greater London Authority Act 1999. So Judge Cockrell said that the costs involved in making this reversal would be enormous, and that the injunction sought would be impossible to grant. She said the claim is one that has absorbed a good deal of time and cost. More court resources have been used than should have been used through multiple applications. I can see no real basis why this needs any further consideration. The correct answer in this case is to say that the application is dismissed. Now, she initially refused to allow that to go to appeal, but in fact, they are continuing to see what options they have on this. Now, in the meantime, today, during Mayor's questions, Sadiq Khan was asked about, well, first of all, would the price go up in the future? And he said this: it's not inconceivable that in the future, at some date, the congestion charge could go up or down, ULEZ could go up and down, or the low emission zone could go up or down as it did in the past. But he was also asked about per mile charging. And he said a pay per mile scheme is off the table, not on his radar. That's what he was saying today. But unfortunately, only a few months ago, he was saying this. He said that the ultimate destination is a smart road user charging scheme in London. We've been looking around the world about what sort of schemes they have. And he said, what we want is a scheme that can treat each driver differently in relation to the time you're driving, the distance you're driving, and if there are good alternatives with public transport and how polluting your vehicle is. So, okay, maybe to the letter, he was telling the truth in the sense that he's not looking at a per mile charging scheme as such, but certainly per mile is part of what he's looking at in any case. But I thought I would end this segment on ULEZ with this report from Car Dealer. London used car dealers urged to send non-ULEZ compliant part exchanges to Ukraine. I don't even know where to start with this, so let's just look at the text. London car dealers are being urged to consider sending non-ultra low emission zone compliant cars, used cars, to Ukraine to help the war effort. Charity Car for Ukraine is urging dealers to think about donating diesel 4x4s or pickup trucks for use on the front line rather than refuse taking them in part exchange altogether. So, of course, people have found that since ULEZ has been expanded, that the value of their cars has plummeted. And what these people are now saying is we should send them to Ukraine so that Ukraine can become the dumping ground of the world, because of course, once they're on the front line, they're not going to last too long. Vanessa, I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, when you told me this earlier, I think it was disbelief. I mean, so what? Ukraine now becomes landfill for the UK scrap cars? Because that's effectively what it is, right?
That is exactly what it seems to be. And now I understand that that particular charity car for Ukraine has already shipped £2.5 million worth of cars over to Ukraine. So we're covering the country with depleted uranium and heavy weaponry being blown up and so on. The cleanup costs after this are going to be horrendous, and it's just really a disgrace. So let's leave that with people to think about and move on to this, back to the UK Health Security Agency. So they are very happy that the SIREN study has been revamped. So this is SIREN 2.0. It began at the beginning of September. And this, of course, SIREN was originally set up at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, in inverted commas, in June 2020. And that SIREN stands for SARS-CoV-2 Immunity and Reinfection Study. And it has been all about continually testing healthcare workers across the UK for COVID-19 to provide crucial information relating to the virus. So let's just have a look at the crucial information. So they've done the original SIREN test did 1.1 million PCR tests, 420,000 blood tests, 44,500 healthcare workers were involved, all four UK nations, and 135 NHS trusts. So what they're saying is that they're recruiting participants from the original 45,000 healthcare workers that took part in the original test. They're saying that it remains the largest study of its kind globally, and that they've expanded their collaborations with the Wellcome Sanger Institute and the Worldwide Influenza Centre and the Francis Crick Institute to ensure that they can continue to address important scientific questions. So that should make us all feel wonderful. But even better, Yellow Card is back in the news because the MHRA has decided to launch a Yellow Card site in Belfast in Northern Ireland, all intended to strengthen patient safety. So apparently there are 6 MHRA commissioned regional Yellow Card centres now, one in Birmingham, one in Cardiff, Edinburgh, Liverpool, Newcastle, and now Belfast. They said the Yellow Card scheme enables the MHRA to monitor safety concerns such as suspected side effects or adverse incidents involving healthcare products. These include medicines, vaccines, blood factors, and immunoglobulin products, medical devices, e-cigarettes, and complementary therapies such as homeopathies. So that's good news. Now here's Alison Cave, the Chief Safety Officer at the MHRA, and well, this is what she had to say. Patient safety is our top priority. So that's more good news. It never ends. Now, of course, the MHRA has never properly published the Yellow Card data for the COVID-19 vaccines. And of course, as we see more and more reports of adverse reactions as a result of COVID-19 vaccines, they aren't really updating the Yellow Card scheme anymore, the Yellow Card database for COVID vaccines anymore. So clearly patient safety is their top priority. And of course, there's no particular acknowledgement that any of the adverse reactions have been as a result of COVID-19 vaccines at all. So let's move on then to this. I just wanted to mention this very briefly because we saw over the last couple of days, weeks, strange earthquake lights spotted above Morocco moments before the devastating tremors remained a mystery, said The Independent. Let's see what we have here from the Jerusalem Post. Mysterious flash illuminates Moroccan sky moments before earthquake. Ominous sign, says the subhead. Lights captured in Moroccan sky before destructive earthquake are similar to those witnessed in Turkey. But of course, we had to leave it to the Daily Mail to bring the conversation right into the gutter. Never mind the fact that lots of people died in this. This was their coverage. Mysterious lights were spotted in the sky before Morocco's devastating earthquake hit last week, and scientists don't know what caused them. Well, is that true? We'll see in a second. But the key point here is, while the clips have not been verified, the unexplained sightings have baffled onlookers, with some suggesting that a UFO or lightning could be to blame. So they bring the conversation to a hugely intelligent level. So what would be causing these lights? Well, it's been discussed for many, many years what might be the cause of lights that are commonly seen just before earthquakes. In terms of the actual video clip itself, one explanation might be that power lines were coming down, of course, but this is another thing that is very much a possibility, and that is the piezoelectric effect in quartz-rich rocks. So this is a scientific paper talking about that. Now, what they commonly say is that earthquake lights include bluish flames that appear to come out of the ground at ankle height, orbs of light called ball lightning that float in the air for tens of seconds or even minutes, quick flashes of bright light that resemble regular lightning strikes, except they come out of the ground instead of out of the sky, and so on. So this is a likely explanation, and we should make the point that the area just around Marrakesh is absolutely full of quartz, and this is sort of a requirement in order to have this type of event happen. Okay, finally, I just want to end with this. Now, there's been quite a bit in the press today and yesterday over the online safety bill, which continues to go through Parliament. And in one of the reports, I saw them highlighting a full fact tweet from 2022. And because they mentioned it in the report, I thought I would bring it back on screen here today, because I thought it was quite interesting. This is full fact tweeting out that freedom of expression is at risk while lessons from pandemic are forgotten in the online safety bill. Too much power is being left with internet companies. Decisions about freedom of expression should be made openly and democratically. And I did find it a little ironic that Full Fact was worried about freedom of expression when they seem to be doing quite a lot to try to shut that down. But nonetheless, this was the graphic that went with that tweet from Will Moy, the chief executive. And he's saying, or he said at the time, "We know that people have died because of the misinformation surrounding COVID-19. And he went on to say, "We need a bill that protects all citizens online from harmful misinformation and threats to freedom of expression." So I'd just like to consider that for 1 second, because first of all, we know that people have died from because of the misinformation surrounding COVID-19. The question is that statement correct? I would suggest that yes, it is correct. If you consider that everything that came out of the mouths of the British government with respect to COVID-19 was misinformation, and that caused hospitals to panic, perhaps, putting people on ventilators that maybe didn't need to be, or throwing people out of hospitals and into care homes at an inappropriate moment. So I think there's no question that misinformation did cause the deaths of people around COVID-19. And then he said, "We need a bill that protects all citizens online from harmful misinformation and threats to freedom of expression." And I think that's true too, because as we know, most of the harmful misinformation that we witness these days comes from, at least in the UK, from the British government with respect to health, with respect to war, Ukraine, and so on. And maybe we want to think a little bit about that, about whose speech actually needs to be regulated. Is it the speech of the general public, or is it the speech of the British government and the mainstream press? We'll leave you to think about that. Now we got to end there. We'll be back in a few minutes with some extra. Kevork hopefully will stay with us, but certainly Vanessa and I will be there. We will see you then in a couple of minutes for that if you're a UK Column member. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Bye-bye.